warfare, rather disinformation warfare. And today we have two distinguished speakers giving us their perspective from different angles, from different countries. In short introduction, apart from giving you my own take, which is the following. Well, I will also be giving you very, very short biographical details about our speakers. Number one, that information has been used in Russia's hybrid warfare has been apparent for a number of years. It's been, as some experts have put it, weaponized long ago. And one of the ways to use information or rather disinformation was to actually make any sources of information questionable. Not that Russia has tried to pretend that this is the only source of truth to the world, but rather its aims were kind of to discredit any information. My good friend, author and journalist, Peter Pomerantsev actually wrote a fantastic book on the back of this idea, which is called Nothing is True and Everything is Possible. And this was based on his firsthand experience while living in Moscow. So today we are in a new, different world where Russia actually has moved from words, from digital warfare into actual warfare. And 2 months into this warfare, into this war, we need to examine where we stand, where the West stands, how it looks from the Western perspective, and what our colleagues, our partners are doing with this front of Russian war, which is as dangerous and as strong as their tanks and missiles. So to discuss these issues today, we have Dr. Susanne Spahn, a German historian, political scientist, and a journalist. PhD thesis is actually focused on Russia's foreign policy toward Ukraine and Belarus since '91, which was published as a book. Dr. Spahn has worked on international projects at LSE and Vilnius Institute for Policy Analysis. She writes analysis and studies for journals and foundations, among which 6 monographs on Russia, Russia's information policy, and the Russian media. Her research has been featured in leading German and international media sources. She will speak first on the Russian role, or on the role of disinformation in Putin's war against Ukraine. And our second speaker from Riga, Mr. Viktors Makarovs, is a special envoy on digital affairs at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Latvia. He holds a degree in political science from the University of Copenhagen and has worked extensively with the Latvian NGO and think tank community before joining the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in 2011. Exact opposite what I have done. I worked for the Georgian diplomatic service for 23 years and then joined the think tank. Mr. Makarovs will focus on certain aspects of countering information manipulation as well as a Digital Service Act. So, Dr. Spahn, the floor is yours.
So, thank you very much for inviting me to the event. I'm happy to see you again. And of course, I hope to see you in person soon. So, thank you. Of course, the topic is very important one. Russian disinformation has paved the way to war and continues to justify it every day. So I've been doing research on Russian state media for 8 years now. I've published 6 studies on this, and I'm mainly focusing on RT and Sputnik, but also on other so-called alternative outlets. So please let me show you some examples. I'd like to share my presentation. So, do you see it?
Yes, please. Go.
Very good. So let me start by giving you a short introduction on Russian state media in Germany. So here you can see this news outlet SNA News. So this is run by the media agency Russia Sivonia, and the German language edition of RT. This is run by this lady Dinara Toktosunova. She is also head of the video agency Rapli, and RTDE is based in Berlin since 2014. And since December last year, they are also broadcasting their their TV program, but there are some special problems because they don't have a license for Germany. So this is indeed a problem, and perhaps we can also talk about it later. So let me move on and showing you the main narratives. So I think the first one and most important, of course, is to blame the West and especially NATO for war in Ukraine, and showing them that they are aggressive countries. For example, here you can see a report by RTDE where they state that all Western countries and Germany, of course, are suffering from Russophobia, and they want to contain and destroy Russia for decades and centuries. So this is the main argument that is being repeated steadily. The second narrative is to whitewash the war and to cover the real plans. So this was evident on the day of the attack on the 24th of February. Here you can see a report. So Putin stated that Russia has no plans to counter Ukraine. Everybody knows that this is not true. And of course, the war is not called by its name. So you probably know there's a special media law in Russia that forbids the usage of the name war. So it's called a special operation that aims to denazify and to liberate Ukraine. So this is the official purpose. And of course, Russia is sending peacemaking troops. And it was also interesting to read on the day of the attack that the Russian Ministry of Defense stated that civilians won't be attacked and cities won't be attacked either. So everybody knows that this is not true, but nevertheless, the Russian state media have stated this. So I think there's no need to debunk it, but just to remind you, this famous case of the theater in Mariupol, where it was written, Dieti, children, next to the building where civilians were hiding, and nevertheless it was destroyed. So let me move on to the third narrative. In fact, this is not new because Russian state media have been using it since the annexation of Crimea in 2014. This myth of Nazis in Ukraine that are allegedly threatening the Russian-speaking population. And of course, nationalists are blamed for the bombardments of houses. So another example, the famous port city Mariupol, and everybody knows that Mariupol is surrounded by Russian troops, so there's a lot of evidence in the international press, and also satellite images confirm this. But when you read RTDE, you can see that allegedly, again, this Ukrainian nationalists and Nazis allegedly have taken hostages in Mariupol, so it's them. Another example, so this is an example just some days before that was published, so you can see the narratives don't change. So it's interesting, after 2 months of war, it's the same. So allegedly Azov fighters, so they are the main nationalist forces, they allegedly want to kill all people in Donbass and even cut children's heads off. So there's no evidence, of course, no sources divided, but nevertheless, these misrepresentations are being spread. So another point, I think that is very important, that RTDE and also SNA, they are still active in Germany. And this shouldn't be the case, because we even have two sanctions. So first of all, the EU sanctions against RT and Sputnik, so it's forbidden to spread contents. And secondly, our media regulator, MABB, has also forbidden the TV program of RTDE because they have no license for Germany. And they can't get a license for Germany because in Germany, due to a special law, media that is completely financed by a state can't broadcast in Germany. So this is the law. And Russia tried to go around, and first they tried to get a license in Luxembourg, then they got one in Serbia. So they start with a license in Serbia, and of course our media regulator wasn't happy to see this, and but nevertheless they are still working. Although the decision of the media regulator is already confirmed by court in Berlin, but nevertheless, they keep on working and spreading their contents. So they create and if you want to see the TV program, so here it's written in German. So we are sorry, our live, but you just have to switch on VPN, for example, Swiss address, and no problem, you can see the live program. So the office is still working, in contrast to our broadcaster Deutsche Welle, that has been shut down in Moscow. Also the office is free. They enjoy freedom of press and opinion. RT and Sputnik keep on working and nobody cares about. So this is the situation in Germany. And I think this is a topic we should discuss later. And if you look at the success of Russian disinformation in Germany, it's important to understand that it's not only the state media. So the audience of RTDE was around 1.4 million users in September last year. So during the time of our federal elections. So I wrote a study on this topic, how they try to influence our elections. But Russia has many influential persons, journalists, and politicians who support the narratives and the Russian agenda. So first of all, our extremist parties, Alternative for Germany and the left. And here, for example, you can see the head of the parliamentary group in the Bundestag, Alice Weidel. And she says, well, the West incited Russia, and so they couldn't, they had no choice. So we know this narrative, of course. And I think this is the most famous example. Former Chancellor Schröder, he just has given an interview to New York Times some days ago, where he said, I do not believe that Putin commanded the massacre in Bucha. And this is Schröder's job since the annexation of Crimea in 2014, that he regularly justifies Russian foreign policy and especially President Putin. And this is why Russian disinformation is extremely effective in Germany, because we have Of course, not only the Alternative for Germany and Schröder, but there are many persons supporting the Russian agenda. And I think, in fact, this is a problem. So I think, so in conclusion, let me summarize the main points. I think it's evident that Russia tries to discredit Ukraine internationally, to blame the West for war in Ukraine, and to justify the war and to deny war crimes. So I think it becomes clear that RT, DE, and also SNA, they are weapons in information warfare. And this is exactly what Margarita Simonian, head of RT, has already stated 8 years before. So I think it's high time to take action. And I think our media authorities and other authorities, they should implement the EU sanctions more decisively, but because it's not enough just to welcome them, it's also important to implement them, of course. So thank you for your attention. And I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Spahn. Yes, we'll move to the questions after Mr. Makarovs' presentation, to whom I yield the floor.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to speak with you all tonight. And greetings from the still sunny Riga, where we feel spring, and there are lots of Ukrainian flags around town and indeed all over the country. Now to come back to the issue we're discussing today, before I jump to the issue of how to deal with disinformation, perhaps a couple of points on what it is exactly that we're dealing with here. And first of all, I would like to start by telling that back in 2014 and even in 2015, when we started raising the alarms about the danger of disinformation, when we went to Brussels to talk to people about this, there wasn't really much interest in discussing it. Everyone believed that Latvians, that's your issue. We don't have that problem. I'm very happy to see that this has changed radically today, and everyone realizes that this is indeed a challenge of a global nature. Now, there are 4 questions about disinformation in Latvia that I think need to be answered carefully. Question number one is this a new phenomenon? The second one is disinformation really about information and facts? The third question is it something that only those who consume their information in Russian are susceptible to? And finally, can you address this by just switching off the television set? Now, my answer to all of these 4 questions is negative. In terms of how new this is, now, we just heard about the German experience with RT. RT has been on German market for about 6 years, if I'm not mistaken. Now, imagine if you have had such media outlets in your information environment, not for 6, but for 60 years. Imagine if it was consumed not by a relatively small group of people, but by a majority of the population. Now, you will be looking at a situation somewhat similar to what we have in Latvia. The Russian disinformation media are perceived as a natural element of our media environment because they came in during the Soviet occupation of Latvia. They stayed. They have not always been the way they are now, but still they are perceived as a natural presence in our information environment, and that presents a particular challenge. Now, the second point, is it just about facts and information? No, it's not. We are increasingly aware of the fact that disinformation and propaganda are about playing on people's identity and exploiting people's emotions and feelings and the need for confirmation. The third question, is it just about information that we receive in the Russian language? No, it is not, because lots of tropes, lots of narratives that the Russian disinformation seeks to exploit are unfortunately shared by people who consume their information in Latvian as well. These people may have a very negative feeling and view of Russia, but at the same time, we have lots of support, for example, for anti-vaxxerism, a conspiracy theory and a lie that the Russian propaganda seeks to exploit extensively during the COVID pandemic. In the same vein, the Russian propaganda has sought to exploit the so-called failed state narrative. And we have to be honest, this is something that you hear a lot from people in Latvia. They are dissatisfied with the way politics or public administration work, and criticism is natural. But at the same time, this is something that our adversary has tried to exploit and, whenever possible, to amplify. And we have to be aware of that. Sometimes these are not narratives created in Moscow. These are sometimes narratives that are of local origin, but at the same time are a vulnerability. And lastly, at the moment, there isn't, I think, a single significant Russian or Russian government-controlled television station, television program available on Latvian cable networks. At the same time, propaganda and disinformation continue flowing in. We have plenty of propaganda and disinformation content available on social platforms, such as YouTube, for example, and of course also Facebook and others. We are in free and open society, so we do not block everything that might not be to the government's liking. So how do we face this challenge? I would say that there is no single silver bullet, and we need to look at several policy areas. I'll focus on one in particular that Giorgi mentioned, but these policy areas, I would say they are five: government communications, independence, media, media literacy, regulation, foreign policy. Now, government communications, we talk a lot about strategic communications. Let's demystify this. It's and make it simple. It's about effective communications by government. It has to be professional. It has to be honest. It has to be in a language that people understand. So learn to talk to the society, to the media. It's very practical. You need to invest resources. Quite simple. And it has to be done in a responsible, democratic, and transparent way. The second issue, independence media. To be quite honest, if I were to choose just one thing I could do to address disinformation, I would say we need pluralistic independence media. Without that, it's not going to be possible to deal with disinformation, because people will always trust independent media, independent sources more than they trust a particular government in power. And this is exactly what we are doing. We are investing more in media. We are creating support mechanisms for local media, also extremely important. So this is a lot of work. It's not very glamorous perhaps, but this is absolutely essential. Media literacy and education, very important, but let's be honest, this is not something that is going to give an immediate result. This is something that will perhaps change the situation in a decade or two. But nevertheless, we need to start now. Just don't confuse the timelines. If we have a crisis situation, if we have an emergency, starting with media literacy in schools, it's not going to address this particular situation. Foreign policy. look, disinformation does not come out of the blue. The most vicious disinformation has a source, and that source, in our case, is mostly the Russian government and the propaganda outlets, propaganda assets that it controls and supports. This is why we are raising now the issue of imposing costs on foreign actors who actually do these things to us and also to others. I believe that the organizations, not just RT and Sputnik, that have been sanctioned in the EU, but also the others, have to bear consequences. RTR, which is one of the most vicious propaganda outlets controlled directly by the Russian government, is still widely available in many European countries, not in Latvia, not in the other Baltic countries, as far as I know, but in many other places, this is available. It shouldn't be the case. So look at the sources. It's a foreign policy issue. And lastly, regulation. And when I talk about regulation, I do it in a very cautious way, because what we don't want to do is to define or redefine the limits of free speech. Again, free speech has to be, and freedom of expression has to be respected. When we create regulatory mechanisms in Europe for the online platforms, we do not say now the users will be allowed less than they were before. We are not regulating the user's speech. We are regulating how the platforms should deal with the risks presented by disinformation. For example, when the platforms such as Facebook say we do not allow inauthentic behavior, so all kinds of trolls, fake accounts, and so on, excellent. Everyone agrees these things should not exist. They have nothing to do with freedom of expression. What is not so good is the implementation. We've heard Facebook tell a lot about how much they've done, but in reality, they haven't done enough. So we want transparency in this regard. We want them to actually undertake obligations in this area, and also share data about what they do with the research community and with the regulators. This is just one of the examples. On the other hand, we also know that at the moment, if a user for some reason gets restricted or blocked on the platform, there is no legal recourse. There is no way of complaining. And this is also not okay. So this is another obligation on the part of the platforms to be transparent and protect freedom of expression. So there has to be a balance. What is important is that the EU, I think, by and large, has found the way to maintain that balance, and that is expressed in the DSA, the Digital Services Act, which was just finalized, at least politically. It's not officially adopted yet, but there is a political agreement on this act. It's very important. It's going to define how the online platforms, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, TikTok, and others, will have to behave and mitigate the risks of disinformation. The act itself is about the illegal speech, but also disinformation. These are two separate areas, but both are within the remit of DSA. And the reason I'm mentioning this for you is that this, I think, is also a relevant area to look at for other countries, especially countries that have a special relationship with the EU, DCFTA country, like Georgia. This is, I think, a good way forward, and the important thing is that we don't have lots of different individual national regulatory regimes. I think the more countries adopt in general lines the approach taken by the EU, the better our chances of making it work are. So to be very practical, if there is interest in Georgia in learning how the DSA works, we would be happy to talk to you about it. And it's quite important to keep in mind that it's not just about the legislation itself, it's also about how it's going to be implemented. And for that, there will need to be an institution, digital coordinators, and this will also take resources. So to conclude, disinformation is a very broad and sometimes imprecise way to define the problem. You need to look at the aspects and also the circumstances in different countries. You need a multi-vector response, not just one silver bullet, but several policies, and consider the short-term and long-term responses. They're all needed, but you need to understand which is going to give you what result. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. You both were really wonderful in a dynamic and very forceful in your presentations. Sorry to sound like a professor at my university, but I really appreciate excellent presentations. Well, I have a number of questions here. I will convey them one by one. And sorry if you have already touched some aspects of these questions. You can just develop what you've said in a kind of specific to this question way. Let's start with the Germany-related questions. Dr. Spahn, you personally, how satisfied are you in these 2 months with the German government response to the reality that has been in Germany for a number of years, but has kind of accelerated and become more poignant in the last 2 months? Number one. Number two, if you could kindly share with us your opinion that actually about the thing that puzzles me for quite some while. And you were quite right in pointing out that Russia has some peculiar allies in the West and in Germany in particular, which do not see necessarily eye to eye with one another, meaning the far right and ultra left. And yet both actually very often act as in Russia's interest, or at least they favor Russia in many areas of their ideology, their conduct. And how is that possible? Don't you think that this should be creating some kind of awkwardness, at least when the far right and the far left actually are on the same side, right? And if you be so kind to answer these two questions, then I will move to the questions which are probably more related to Mr. Makarovs.
Yes, thank you for your questions. So concerning our government, I must say I'm not satisfied at all, because our government has been ignoring this problem of disinformation for 8 years, since the annexation of Crimea. So I've been analyzing disinformation, as I've already said, for 8 years, and I can see how Russian state media address discontent in society, address dissatisfied people, and exploit crises for the political goals. So first was the refugee crisis, so we had our Pegida movement, and then we had Brexit, then of course Corona crisis. And here you can see this alliance between the anti-Corona movement, our Querdenkers, so-called unconventional thinkers, and the Russian state media. So they give them a floor. They are publishing all their statements about Corona tyranny and so on. So you can see that they interact closely. And our government has been ignoring this problem. And I've been also analyzing the reporting on elections. So on federal elections, regional elections. So there's also a tendency that the Russian state media support the right wing and left wing, AfD and the left. and there has been no response in Germany at all. So, for example, in 2017, LSE has published a wonderful report how Russia is meddling into our elections, and our government stated, no, there was no interference of Russia. So it was really surprising for me to see this. And when I look, for example, at the United States or Great Britain, there, of course, there's a completely other attention for this problem. So about meddling into elections or the Brexit referendum, there have been high-ranking commissions and so on. And in Germany, we have complete silence. And I think this is a scandal, first of all, that the ban on RT-DE TV program is not implemented. So our media regulator in Berlin, first they fined them, but there was no reaction at all. And then at the beginning of April, the media regulator stated, our mission is completed, the ban has been implemented. But as I've shown, there's only 2 or 3 clicks needed to start the TV program, so it's no problem. And when it comes to EU sanctions, so this refers the web contents, again, no implementation. So our women responsible in the government for media and culture, Claudia Roth, from the party The Greens, she said, yes, we welcome the EU sanctions, fine, but she does not implement it. And some weeks ago, I had the opportunity to take part in a conference of our Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and there I addressed this problem, and there was a colleague of her, and he said, yes, we know this problem, but we cannot react, and generally the German government should not meddle into the media sphere. Okay, but yes, I know we have this law, but on the other hand, we allow the Russian government to meddle into our affairs, into our elections, into our media sphere. So I think this kind of argument is absurd, and I don't understand this, to be honest, and but this is a reality in Germany. And I think when it comes to EU sanctions, I see the real problem that Germany really loses credibility also in relation to its international partners, because we see this is not only the case with regard to RT and Sputnik, but also when it comes to actions against Russian oligarchs, Germany is not very active. When it comes to delivery of weapons, Germany is also very reluctant, and so on and so on. And so I see this is a general problem that should be addressed. And when it comes to freedom of speech, I think it's more than clear that RT and SNA, they are weapons in information warfare, and we should implement EU sanctions in order to not to become ridiculous. And I think after, hopefully, war in Ukraine will be finished, then nevertheless, our authorities should address this problem of disinformation, because I know myself, because currently I'm working on a project of the Berlin think tank Liberal Modernity, and we are analyzing all these so-called alternative outlets. I know that our Berlin regulator, for example, does the monitoring of other suspicious outlets like conspiracy theories and so on, but not in relation to RT and SNA. And I don't understand why. So I think we should make sure that they stick to journalistic standards. And of course, it's more than clear that they are not willing to do this. But our German government, unfortunately, does not react accordingly. So the second question, this is also interesting, this alliance between left and right-wing forces. I've been examining this question too for many years. So these politicians regularly go to Moscow, not only to Russia, but also to occupied territories, so Crimea and Donbass, in order to act as election monitoring forces. And this is also very interesting that they go there to justify elections, to justify the annexation of Crimea. And so international election monitoring forces stated that no free and fair elections in the Donbass and Crimea, of course, but our left-wing and right-wing forces state the opposite. And so they act in fact as useful idiots for the regime, because of course Russian state media in domestic TV channels, they monitor this and cover this, and the message is, so look here, Russians, our here politicians, EU politicians and German politicians confirm that our elections are fair and free. So in fact, they act as useful idiots, but of course, it's also useful for them because they try to work and to get political capital and to get voices in the run of the elections. And you must see that especially in East Germany, AfD, so Alternative for Germany, is extremely popular. It's the second strongest political party. So every third votes for AfD, and AfD strongly supports the Russian agenda. So right from the beginning of the annexation of Crimea. And so again, you can see this alliance between the Russian state and AfD, because they support each other. And the left, of course, too.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, we're moving according to our schedule, so we don't have any panic kind of situation. So a couple of questions to you, Mr. Makarovs, and I'll try to integrate some of them, some of the questions coming from our audience as well. Number one, you have mentioned how RT works. From our own experience, Sputnik actually is no less toxic kind of source. But one thing that we have noticed is that Russian propaganda, particularly through Sputnik, actually is custom made. It varies from country to country. And for instance, if in Georgia they're trying to sow anti-Turkish and anti-Western sentiments simultaneously, in Turkey you would notice that Sputnik is one of the most pro-Turkish media kind of outlets. You would think that they are the greatest patriots of Turkey, while, as I said, in Georgia, they are doing anti-Turkish, anti-Azerbaijani work, apart from doing, well, RT specializes on anti-Western in Georgia, but still. So is there any specific way they approach Latvian audience that is different from any other, number one? And number two, you already touched upon this, but if I may, and this would be also in relation to the question from our audience, which comes from Patty Soapman, how do we as individuals best deal with disinformation when we see it on social media? If I may develop this slightly, of course, in long-term education, working with public is something that everyone should do. This should be the goal of not just governments, but civil society, academia, etc., etc. But shouldn't we be doing something specific in times of crisis like now, during the war? Maybe with being conscious that we shouldn't undermine the values we're trying to defend from Russia, the free society, the freedom of information, basic democracy. But when democracy is assaulted, shouldn't there be certain ways democracy should protect itself in these crisis situations? Sorry, I went into a rant. I think it wasn't just.
I think, Giorgi, thank you very much. These are really interesting questions. On question one, it's true we are slightly different in the sense that in Latvia, we don't have RT, and Sputnik in Latvian and the Russian version of Sputnik for the audiences in Latvia, they're not very popular. So it's not, they are not a major player. They're an important player, but they have not gained too much traction. So, and your observation is absolutely right. They will say whatever they want to, whatever they need to say to gain trust and promote their agenda. So there is no contradiction between the same outlet being anti-Turkish in one edition and then totally pro-Turkish in another one. That's how this works. It's about propaganda. There is nothing about real positions and political discussions there. But in Latvia, interestingly, the real impact comes from the media outlets and media production that is aimed at the population in Russia proper. For historical reasons, a significant share of the Latvian population follow that line of Russian propaganda, and it presents a challenge, as I said. So a little bit special in our case. On the second question, how do we, what can we do individually? Look, yes, the standard answer is be critical. Think about the source the information or purported information comes from. Think about the angle. Is the channel of communication to be trusted at all? We often hear, oh, I saw it on the internet. But where exactly on the internet? Was it someone on Facebook, or was it a reputable media organization or a public institution? So we can be critical, but I would add to that on issues that are emotional for us. It's not about being critical about facts. It's also about being conscious of our own sympathies. To give you a very topical example, I really want Ukraine to win this war as soon as possible. And all of us really want to see the news confirming that Ukraine is winning already now today. Unfortunately, these news will not necessarily present all of the picture. Unfortunately, we know it with our minds that Russia is still has a lot of it still has a lot of military potential. It's still killing people. It's not going to be easy for Ukraine to win this war. And we have to be critical also in this sense, understanding how our emotions can play with us. Every time we read something that we like, that we want to be true, it's not necessarily always going to be true. So be mindful of that. And how do we protect ourselves? Again, we need to try and be rational. I would say we cannot sterilize the information environment. We cannot get every bit of for every falsehood and every bit of propaganda and disinformation out of our world. It's not going to happen. We need to immunize ourselves and get better. So get better at media literacy. But at the same time, I mentioned the regulatory aspect. We need to have this dialogue with the online platforms that continue making money on disinformation. Unfortunately, it's monetized. It's not just about states gaining the foreign policy leverage that they want. It's also about the platforms with their business model. So we need to work on the regulatory framework. Cannot be done in one day, though.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Well, for our audience, we still have a few minutes for your questions, if you like. Please write in Q&A. Meanwhile, if I may make a short comment on something that Dr. Spahn has said, there are cases when governments actually treat certain issues with a certain bias. Let's be honest about this. And you have mentioned Brexit, and as a former ambassador to Britain, I cannot avoid this issue. The intrigue with Brexit is that the fact that Russian money got into the Leave campaign heavily is no secret at all. At least the questions that should have been raised had very solid foundation in the form of the chief financiers, chief donors, direct connections with Russia. And I do not only mean that Mr. Banks, who was the single largest donor of the Leave campaign, is married to a Russian lady. His business money connections with Russia were out there. And the interesting way how the government actually for years has been arguing against official investigation would be probably puzzling, to be very polite, if not ridiculous. The argument was that constitutionally, referenda in Britain do not have status, compulsory status. Basically, the outcome of the referendum is not legally a final say in a matter. It is a parliamentary sovereignty, and this is why Parliament has the final say. I'm not sure to anyone this sounds like a convincing argument for not investigating not just the connections, but actual violations of the referendum rules, because the Leave campaign spent much more than they should have, right? But yes, even though we all are really impressed and we commend British government's actions and leadership, actually, specifically in this crisis. But yes, well, there are certain issues that are related to Russia's meddling, but could be kind of some governments could be partial to those. And this would be my final question. And this also goes to Dr. Spahn. And if Mr. Makarovs wants to pick up with the Latvian context, I would really appreciate. We all have seen for years that Russia had managed to basically put very influential opinion makers, politicians on their direct payroll. And for some time, there were arguments that they had contributed to economic cooperation, which is what's wrong with it, okay? But in this context of this savage war that Russia wages on Ukraine, when you hear some kind of excuses for Russia from these people, and this is not limited to Germany, we saw the Austrian, the French, and others. I've seen some British, to my regret, whom I personally had known. Could you share with us your opinion how their reputations have been doing, especially in the past 2 months, and whether this is at all related to the situation in Latvia? Then Mr. Makarovs could add on to this, and this would be probably with which we'll be ending.
Yes, well, I think Russian money is the keyword you mentioned. When it comes to this agents of influence, because you really should call it by name. And this was the problem in Germany for many years. So just take the example of former Chancellor Schröder. just now, with the background of war in Ukraine, there's a public outrage that Schröder is being paid by Rosneft, Gazprom, and these pipeline companies, and he justifies war in Ukraine just now in 2022. And he has been acting like this for many years. So the best example was this pipeline project Nord Stream 2. So it was documented by German journalist of the newspaper Tagesspiegel, how Schröder acted in favor of this pipeline project in 2015 to 2017. So just after the annexation of Crimea, how he met with social democratic ministers, first of all Gabriel and Cyprius, together with head of Gazprom Miller, in order to start this pipeline project. And at the same time, Schröder was regarded as one of the best experts on Russia. He was nearly in every second talk show on TV where he justified annexation of Crimea. So, and I really wonder how the Russian, how our public opinion ignored this fact for many years. So we were listening to Schröder's explanations concerning the annexation of Crimea, of the poisoning of Navalny, now war crimes in Ukraine, and his method of argumentation is always the same. He doesn't say it's not Russia. He says, no, I think and I believe that Putin couldn't have done this. You see, so, and this is all the same. This is his method to sow doubt and insecurity. And it's the same method that is being applied by Russian state media to sow this sort of doubt. And so, and it's not, unfortunately, not only Schröder, but also another very important agent of influence is Alexander Ra. So he was head of many very important think tank in Berlin, DGAP, so the Russian section of this think tank. And currently he serves as scientific director of this German-Russian Forum. So this is also very important organization for Russian-German relations. And when I was writing my study on reporting on the federal elections last year, I could see that Ra was extremely active and present in Russian domestic media, in Russian state media abroad, and in German media. And in Germany, he tried to generate understanding for Russian positions. He said, yes, of course, we can't live without Russian gas imports, and Russia has always been a reliable partner. And now we see that it isn't, because Russia threatens to stop gas exports, of course. And in Russia, he said, oh no, the Germans are arrogant and ignorant. They don't understand the Russians and just want to teach them democracy. So in Russia, he tells people what they want to hear. And in Germany, he tries to create understanding for Russia and the Russian leadership, of course. And when you look at his activities, he also serves as an advisor for Gazprom in Brussels. And this is the key information, of course. And when I was analyzing all his interviews, I couldn't find this information at all. And I think this is the problem, that our editorial offices of media, they don't give this information. It should be given, because people in Germany usually think, yes, Mr. Ra is one of the leading experts on Russia, but they don't know that he is being paid by Gazprom. Yeah. So, and like Schröder and Ra, we have some more agents of influence like them.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Makarovs, if you would like to make any comments or sum up your presentation once again.
Yes, thank you. First of all, apologies. I'm coming to you from a less comfortable environment, but I still hope you can hear me for a brief comment. A very interesting question. A little bit outside of my professional remit, but I think I'll dare a couple of comments here. And you know how Russia has always said, oh, those Balts, they're so Russophobic. They hate Russia. Not true. For a long time, there were lots of people in Latvia who said, okay, Russia is a neighbor. We would like economic cooperation, cultural ties. We want to develop a normal relationship. And in this sense, this was an influential trend in our politics. But you know, when Russia started really losing friends really fast, in 2008, you will remember what happened in 2008, of course. Then, okay, there were still people who said, aggressive. We have to be aware. It's dangerous behavior, could be repeated. But we still need the gas. We still want to enjoy the benefits of economic cooperation. 2014 happened. So today, I would say Russia has no friends. There are no opinion leaders, influential politicians who advocate anything but total rejection of Russia's foreign policy, of its aggression against Ukraine, against Georgia, still going on. So in this sense, I think we are somewhat different from many other European countries, because in Latvia, what happened to Ukraine triggered the memories of 1940, when the Baltic countries, and Latvia included, were occupied. So it's simply that your question is, it does not apply to Latvia in the same way, I would say.
Of course. Well, my question actually implied whether, because we in Georgia really look for the day when the day of reckoning comes for those who have been playing useful idiots or have been accomplices of Russia for many years. And this includes politicians, this includes business circles, academia, which we have learned on our own skin since, well, very early on, and 2008 was to us something that made everything that Russia has done since a lesson that this is why we're not surprised. Thank you so much to our speakers for excellent contributions. And I do look forward to meeting with you in not so distant future to discuss maybe happier issues, maybe the post-World War, new realities, because without a doubt, the world in which we lived until recently is going to be very different very shortly. It is already very different. Thank you very much indeed, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.